street. Neighbor thought my driveway was free parking for his cars and refused to listen when I asked him to stop. So I came up with a simple plan that made him regret ever using it again. Okay, so let me paint you a picture. I bought my house about a year ago, and honestly, it was the proudest moment of my life. I've been renting shoebox apartments for years. The kind where you can hear your upstairs neighbor sneeze at 3 a.m., or where the washing machine eats your socks and the landlord swears you broke it. Saving for a house took forever. I skipped vacations, worked overtime, and gave up on things I actually wanted so I could stash money away for a down payment. When I finally closed on this place, I felt like I'd crossed into a new chapter of adulthood. It wasn't some massive mansion, but it was mine. A cozy two-story, freshly painted, with a little front yard, and, best of all, a driveway. A driveway. That detail right there. I cannot stress enough how big a deal that was for me. After years of battling street parking wars where parallel parking meant testing the limits of geometry and patience, having a private spot for my car was like winning the lottery. Except, apparently, I wasn't the only one who thought my driveway was prime real estate. Enter Dave. Dave is my next door neighbor. At first glance, he looked like a pretty average suburban dude. Mid-40s, polo shirts tucked into khaki shorts, big sunglasses he probably thought made him look cool but really just screamed, trying too hard, and an ego that could fill a football stadium. He had one of those, I've been here longer than you, so I make the rules, vibes. You know the type. Our very first interaction about the driveway happened the week I moved in. I was still unpacking boxes, and when I pulled up after grabbing takeout, I saw a shiny black SUV sitting dead center in my driveway. I thought maybe it was a delivery driver or a friend of the previous owners who didn't get the memo. But nope, turns out it was Dave's. I knocked on his door, trying to be polite because, hey, first impressions matter. He opened the door with this wide fake smile like he was doing me a favor just by acknowledging me. Hey, I started, keeping it casual. Sorry to bother you, but I think your car's in my driveway. Dave leaned against the door frame, arms crossed, not moving an inch. Oh yeah, I just needed to park there for a little while. You've got plenty of space. That should have been my first red flag. The words, you've got plenty of space. I laughed awkwardly. Yeah, but, it's my driveway. I just moved in, so I kind of need it for my car. He waved his hand like I was overreacting. It's just temporary. I'll move it later. Later ended up being 2 hours. I sat in my car with bags of food cooling down on the passenger seat, waiting like a chump because I didn't want to start my new life in this neighborhood by making enemies. I told myself it was a one-time thing. Maybe he had visitors. Maybe his garage was full. Maybe, hell, I don't know. Maybe his driveway was haunted, whatever. But then it happened again and again. The second time, I got home from work around 6 p.m. and there it was. Dave's SUV parked at an angle like it owned the place. I sighed, walked over, and knocked again. This time, he didn't even bother opening the door all the way. He just cracked it enough to stick his head out. Yeah, he asked. Hey, so your car's in my driveway again, I said, forcing a smile. He shrugged. Oh, right. Just temporary. I'll move it. That became his favorite word, temporary. I swear, if I had $1 for every time he said it, I could have paid off my mortgage early. It didn't matter that temporary meant I was circling the block like a vulture waiting for roadkill, or sitting there with my blinker on while my neighbors stared. By the fourth time, my patience was cracking. I caught him outside washing the same SUV that had been hogging my driveway all morning. Hey Dave, I said walking up, I really need you to stop parking in my driveway. I don't want to cause any trouble, but it's becoming a problem. He looked at me like I'd just asked him to donate a kidney. What's the big deal? You've got a garage, don't you? Yes, I said slowly, trying to keep my cool. But I use my driveway too. It's my property and I'd appreciate it if you didn't park here. He gave this smirk that made my blood pressure spike. Relax, you're new here. Everyone around here borrows space sometimes. I didn't know whether to laugh or scream. Borrowing space? What? Was my driveway suddenly a community resource? I clenched my jaw, nodded, and walked away. It felt like the adult thing to do. Pick your battles, right? Except this wasn't a one-off skirmish. This was turning into a full-blown war. A few weeks later, I got home late. I'm talking close to midnight. I'd had one of those long days at work where you're basically running on fumes, dreaming about nothing but collapsing into bed. I turned onto my street and guess what greeted me? Not one, but 2 cars in my driveway. Dave's SUV and what I later found out was his cousin's sedan. I sat there in the middle of the street, headlights illuminating my very occupied driveway, and I felt my eye twitch. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. My chest felt hot. You know that moment when you're so mad you actually go completely still? That was me. I parked half a block away and trudged to my house, fuming the whole time. The walk felt like a march of defeat. Here I was, paying a mortgage, maintaining my property, and I couldn't even park in my own damn driveway because my neighbor thought it was his overflow lot. I didn't even bother knocking on his door that night. I was too tired, too angry, and honestly, I didn't trust myself not to say something that would end with a police report. The next morning, though, I was still mad. I went outside with my coffee, stared at those cars, and thought, this isn't going away, is it? And I was right. It wasn't going away. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience anymore. This was a pattern. Dave had made up his mind that my driveway was free parking and I was just some newbie who'd have to get used to it. That was the moment I realized something had to change. Because if there's one thing I hate more than an entitled jerk, it's an entitled jerk who thinks they've won. And that, my friends, was just the beginning. Alright, so after that first month of dealing with Dave and his temporary parking nonsense, I figured I could try to be the reasonable neighbor. I even gave myself a little pep talk. Maybe he doesn't know this is private property yet. Maybe he'll get it if I just show some patience. Ha 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 ha. The next week, I decided I needed to document everything. I wasn't going to rely on vague memories of dates and times or, worse, my own sanity. I started taking photos of every time Dave or one of his friends parked in my driveway. Every angle, every license plate, every timestamp. If you'd asked me why I suddenly turned into a part-time private investigator, I would have said it was because my sanity was at stake. Also, I wanted proof that this wasn't just me being paranoid. It started innocently enough, a photo here, a photo there. But then I got meticulous. I created a folder on my computer called Driveway Offenders and subfolders for each vehicle. I even noted times of day, duration of parking, and any excuses I overheard when Dave or his cronies were around. It was becoming my little obsession, but it felt necessary. Then I tried leaving notes. Simple, polite notes, nothing passive-aggressive, just straightforward reminders. Hi Dave, please don't park in my driveway. Thank you. I slipped them under his windshield wiper. Sometimes I taped them to the car window. Every single note disappeared. Either he threw them away or his friends did it. I'll never know. But there they went. My little paper pleas for decency, disappearing like magic. Eventually, I even tried talking to his wife. I figured maybe a softer approach would work. Hey, I'm really struggling with Dave parking in my driveway. Could you maybe talk to him? She shrugged and laughed lightly as if it were a charming anecdote instead of my daily nightmare. That's Dave being Dave. You'll get used to it. Oh no, I would not get used to it. Things started getting worse. One day, I came home to find not one, not two, but 4 cars in my driveway. Dave's SUV, his cousin's sedan, a beat-up hatchback that looked like it had been borrowed from the 1980s, and a shiny little sports car that I later found out belonged to one of his friends. I mean, I get it, college kids or grown adults with too much free time, but this was my driveway. My place of peace, my tiny suburban paradise was now a free parking lot. And honestly, that's when the first seeds of petty revenge began sprouting in my brain. At first, I tried small things. Totally harmless, at least in my mind. I started parking directly behind Dave's car so he couldn't back out without coming to knock on my door. The first time I did it, I swear I heard the little gears in his brain grinding like a factory line. He honked, I ignored it. He pounded on my door, I didn't answer. The look on his face when he realized he was trapped was chef's kiss. Beautiful. Then I started pretending to be unavailable. If he called or knocked, asking me to move so he could get out, I'd suddenly develop a ton of work or a headache. Sorry, can't help right now, Dave, I'd say cheerfully from behind the blinds while sipping coffee like the calmest person on earth. It was petty, it was satisfying, but it wasn't enough. One evening, after a particularly long day, I came home to find all 4 cars again. I was this close to losing it, but I walked up to Dave and tried one last time at the polite approach. Hey, I really need you to stop parking here. This is my property. He looked me up and down like I was insane. Seriously? It's not a big deal. You're overreacting. Oh, I love it when people underestimate me. I kept my cool though, smiled, nodded. All right, I said, thanks for understanding. Inside, I was boiling. He wasn't going to understand. He never understood. And that's when I realized polite requests were useless. Notes were useless. Pity smiles? Useless. So I started plotting. Not anything crazy yet, but I began thinking about how to escalate in ways that were subtle but effective. I made mental lists of every time he'd parked, every excuse he'd given, every temporary that stretched for hours or even entire nights. I thought about security cameras, clear signs, and ways to make him want to move his car before I even had to say anything. And then came the first moment that truly felt like victory. I pulled into my driveway one morning, saw Dave's SUV, and instead of knocking or calling, I parked my car so that his SUV was boxed in. He came out, keys in hand, ready to head to work, and froze. He pounded on my window. I waved cheerfully. He stomped back inside, muttering under his breath, clearly not happy. I tried not to smirk too much, but honestly, it was hard to resist. From that point on, I started implementing a series of petty moves. Nothing illegal, nothing that could get me in trouble, but enough to let him know his little temporary parking game was not going unnoticed. I'd park in front of his driveway sometimes, just enough so he couldn't back out. I'd make sure to leave my trash cans in strategic locations that forced his friends to awkwardly squeeze past if they tried to park. I even made a point of casually walking past, grocery bags in hand, looking like I had absolutely no idea what he was going through, but with a slight grin I couldn't hide. It was slow, methodical, and honestly, fun in a way I hadn't expected. I began to look forward to these little interactions. Not because I hated Dave. I mean, okay, I did, but because I realized I had power over him in a way he hadn't anticipated. But even with these small victories, the problem wasn't solved. Dave still parked whenever he wanted, still acted like he owned my property, still thought I was being ridiculous for caring. His friends even started using the driveway, apparently thinking that since Dave was allowed, everyone was allowed. One morning, I came out to find a full-on line of cars, and for a split second, I questioned my life choices. But then I remembered my little petty victories and grinned. That's when the real plan started forming in my mind. I realized that to deal with Dave, I couldn't just respond. I had to outthink him. I had to be patient, methodical, and completely strategic. If I rushed in, yelled, or called the cops, it would be over too quickly, and he'd probably laugh it off anyway. But if I set the stage, played the long game, Oh, the satisfaction I could get from that. And that's when the idea hit me. I needed a plan that was foolproof, one that would leave no room for excuses, no wiggle room, and no argument. Something simple, legal, and undeniable. Something that would make Dave regret ever thinking my driveway was his personal parking lot. For now, though, I had to be patient. I had to document, observe, and wait for the perfect opportunity. It was almost like playing chess with my neighbor, except the pieces were cars, my sanity, and his growing frustration. By the time chapter 2 ended, I had notebooks full of dates, pictures on my phone organized meticulously, and a mental map of every car, every angle, every loophole. Dave thought he was winning, but in reality, he was just digging himself into a trap. A trap I was carefully, lovingly constructing. And the best part, he didn't even know it yet. By the time I hit what I like to call phase 3 of Operation Driveway Domination, I had realized a few things. 1. Patience is underrated. 2. Dave had zero intention of respecting boundaries unless there were real consequences. And 3. If I wanted this to end with maximum satisfaction, I needed a plan that wasn't just petty. It had to be airtight, legal, and undeniably effective. So I did what any reasonable homeowner in my situation would do. I became a full-time researcher. I started with the basics. Property rights. I called the city, looked up local ordinances, and even checked the homeowners association rules. Side note, if you ever think HOA meetings are boring, try spending 3 hours poring over bylaws while plotting revenge. It's like Sudoku, but with more moral justification. What I found was reassuring. My driveway was indeed my driveway. Any vehicle parked without permission was technically trespassing. Perfect. Next up, towing laws. I learned the ins and outs of municipal towing, from notice requirements to fees. Turns out, I was legally allowed to have unauthorized vehicles towed from private property, as long as proper signage and procedures were in place. Essentially, the city was saying, yes, you can ruin an entitled jerk's morning if they don't get off your property. I filed that info away in my brain under rules I will obey, but you will regret breaking. I didn't rush into anything, though. I wanted this to be perfect. First, I installed a security camera. Not one of those obnoxious, flashing light cameras that scream, I'm watching you, but a subtle one, angled at the driveway entrance, just enough to capture license plates, dates, and angles. I set it up so it looked completely natural, like part of the house, but in reality, it was my little spy. Then came the signs. I painted clear boundary lines along the edges of the driveway, bright white, so it was crystal clear where my property began. Next to that, I installed a simple but bold private property no parking tow away zone sign. Nothing aggressive, just factual. It was impossible for someone to claim ignorance at this point. I could almost hear Dave scoff just thinking about it. He would see those signs and laugh, thinking it was all bluff. And maybe at first he was right. People laugh at boldness all the time, but I was ready. Of course, I also gave him one last direct warning. I caught him outside, polishing his SUV like it was a crown jewel, and I walked over calmly. Hey Dave, I said, smiling casually. I just wanted to let you know if you park in my driveway again, your car will be towed. He paused mid-polish, then smirked. Yeah, right. You wouldn't dare. I didn't argue. I just nodded. All right, have a good night. That was it. No yelling, no threats, just facts, calm and controlled. I could tell by the way his smirk didn't quite reach his eyes that he didn't take me seriously. Fine. Let him underestimate me. That was part of the plan. After that, I waited and waited and waited. Every day, I checked my little camera feed, noted patterns, watched for the perfect opportunity. It was almost zen-like. I drank coffee, read a book, and occasionally smiled when I imagined his reaction once the time came. The perfect opportunity arrived sooner than I expected. One night, Dave had a big morning meeting. You know the type. 10-page PowerPoint, polished shoes, last-minute panic emails. He left his SUV parked squarely in my driveway overnight, presumably because he wanted a quick exit the next morning. I went to bed, feeling a mix of excitement and pure satisfaction. This was it. The stage was set. The next morning, I woke up early, made a cup of coffee, and watched from my window. Dave came out, briefcase in hand, coffee in the other, fully expecting a smooth, stress-free morning. He froze. The driveway camera had already captured everything, but he had no idea that this would escalate into a lesson he'd never forget. I could see the gears turning in his head, the slow realization that he might be about to lose more than just his parking privileges. I stayed calm, sipped my coffee, waited for the exact moment. Everything was ready. The signs, the lines, the camera, and my perfectly timed patience. One call to the towing company and Dave's little temporary parking empire was about to crumble. And I have to admit, just standing there, watching him completely unaware, I felt this weird sense of pride. Not gloating, well, maybe a little, but proud of how carefully I'd planned this. Every note he ignored, every petty trick I'd pulled, every late-night research session had led to this moment. This was no longer about being petty. It was about justice, about respect, about showing someone that boundaries are not optional. And, if I'm honest, about making sure he'd never dare park in my driveway again. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't impulsive, it's calculated. And this was perfect. The night before it happened, I hardly slept. Not because I was anxious, but because I couldn't stop grinning like a maniac. After weeks of careful planning, notes, petty tricks, and camera setups, the moment had finally arrived. Dave's big morning meeting and his SUV left overnight in my driveway created the perfect opportunity. It was as if the universe itself had conspired to deliver him right into my trap. I woke up early, around 5:45 a.m., which in retrospect might be earlier than anyone should willingly wake up on a Saturday. Coffee in hand, I made my way to the window and stared at my driveway. There it was, Dave's SUV, parked like a king, claiming his kingdom. I took a deep sip, savoring the bitterness of the coffee along with the impending justice that was about to unfold. I had called the towing company the night before, explained the situation, and scheduled them to arrive first thing in the morning. Everything was legal, everything was documented, and everything was about to go perfectly. Around 6:15 a.m., I saw him. Dave, briefcase in one hand, coffee in the other, probably rehearsing his presentation in his head, probably thinking this would be the smoothest morning of his life. He didn't notice the subtle gleam in my eye behind the blinds. Then I saw the tow truck roll up. I swear, for a second, time slowed down. Dave's face changed in ways I didn't think were physically possible. From calm and smug to confused, then panic, then sheer horror, all within the span of 30 seconds. He dropped his coffee. Miraculously, it didn't break. I'm still amazed. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" he shouted, running toward the tow driver. The driver, a tall guy with a calm expression that screamed, "I do this for a living, buddy," didn't even flinch. "Private property, unauthorized vehicle, tow scheduled, have a nice day." Dave waved his arms. "You can't tow my car. I live here. I've been parking here for years." The driver pointed to the sign I had installed, the bright white lines, and my neatly documented paperwork. Every I dotted, every T crossed. Dave's protest faltered the moment he read it. I could see him trying to process what was happening. He opened his mouth, probably for some witty comeback, and then realized there was nothing he could say. The paperwork was real. The signs were real, and the camera had already recorded every temporary parking incident he'd ever had. He tried bargaining. "Come on, this is ridiculous. I'll move it, I promise." The driver shook his head. "Sorry, sir, rules are rules. Call your insurance company if you want. Have a good day." And just like that, the SUV was lifted and winched onto the truck. I swear I heard a faint wail somewhere in the neighborhood, but that might have just been Dave. The best part? The neighbors. By now, a few of them had started noticing the ongoing driveway saga. One by one, people peered from their windows, whispered to each other, and smirked. I could feel their silent support radiating from behind lace curtains and half-closed blinds. I waved at Mrs. Thompson across the street, and she gave me a thumbs up like we'd just shared some victorious secret handshake. Dave, meanwhile, was pacing the sidewalk, phone in hand, calling everyone he could think of, looking helpless. He had to pay hundreds in towing fees, fines, and administrative charges just to get his own car back. And all the while, his neighbors, yes, even the ones who had pretended to be oblivious, were silently laughing behind his back. Oh, the sweet, sweet sound of karma doing its thing. Later that day, after the truck had left with his SUV, I stepped outside and surveyed my driveway. Empty, beautiful, untouched. Mine again. It was almost meditative. The kind of satisfaction you get from knowing that, for once, justice had been served without a single physical confrontation. I didn't gloat. Not really. I didn't need to. Dave had learned his lesson the hard way, and I had learned something too. Patience and planning were far more satisfying than any impulse act of anger. Sure, it had been petty, but it had been just. From that day on, Dave never parked in my driveway again. Not once. Not even for just a minute. Or temporarily. I'd won. Not in the sense of humiliation, although I won plenty of that, but in the sense that boundaries had finally been respected. And sometimes, you need a little extreme measure to teach someone that lesson. I even caught him a week later, in his car on the street, glancing at my driveway like a man who had been defeated in a chess game he didn't even know he was playing. I smiled, politely, waved, and went about my day. Funny thing is, my driveway's been looking real empty ever since, and honestly, that's just how I like it. Reading this story as a third person, it's a classic, satisfying tale of suburban petty revenge done right. The narrator's transformation from a patient, frustrated homeowner into a clever, strategic tactician is engaging and relatable. Dave's entitled, dismissive behavior makes him the perfect antagonist, and the slow build-up, from documenting incidents to subtle, calculated retaliation, creates real tension and anticipation. The story balances humor, cleverness, and a touch of schadenfreude, keeping the reader hooked. By the final chapter, the payoff is immensely satisfying, delivering justice without being mean-spirited and leaving a memorable, witty conclusion. It's a well-crafted, enjoyable read.